Okay, welcome back to the next part of my Voyager style grand tour of the outer planets. In the last part of the video, we brought the Aero Freighter from Jupiter all the way over here to Saturn, and we actually ended up passing through the rings. The next stage of our journey is going to be going from Saturn all the way over to Uranus, and that's going to take quite a while, about 8 years. If I bring up the orbiter date converter and I put in the time or the date that we're expected to encounter Uranus, which I got from TransX here. If I go forward on this stage, I can see the encounter MJD, and I just put that number into the orbiter date converter, and that tells me that it's going to be 2168. Now, 8 years of time warp is quite a while, so we're going to get going right away so it doesn't take forever to get over there. So looking out the front window, I'm just going to go to 1000x so we can get one last look at Saturn as we pull away. Maybe go out to 10,000. And that's going to do it for our Saturn encounter. And now out to the maximum speed. Now we've got 5 years of locks in the main system. So here in a little while, around 2165, we're going to have to remember to come over here to the cargo system and put some of our cargo modules into the main lock system so we don't run out of breathable air. Now here I just need to kind of follow when I'm going to pull away from Saturn. And that'll be when this reaches about 0.02. And as soon as that happens, we want to get started with our first mid-course correction. Like I said yesterday, or I should say in the last part of the video, I do think it's good to do that first correction as soon as possible. So we're just going to have a whole lot of time warp here. This is one of the situations where I do wish there was a 200,000 or a 300,000 time warp, because even at 100,000, traveling 8 years takes quite a while. But I will go ahead and record the whole thing. The one time I decided to not record the time warp phase, I had a few people say, no, don't cut anything out, I want to see everything. So I will grant everyone that wish, and the people that don't want to watch can, of course, just skip ahead, 5-10 minutes at a time. But I can't imagine that there's going to be a whole lot to talk about during this next 8 years worth of time warp, other than the various mid-course corrections that I'll have to do, and those are going to be few and far between, so there's probably going to be a lot of dead air. Okay, that ended, so let's go immediately down to 1x and set up our first mid-course correction. Now we'll come forward on this side, and we'll view our Neptune encounter, and we'll come forward to stage 3 on this side. And before we get going with our mid-course correction with Uranus, we'll reconfigure our encounter at Neptune, because that outward angle and inclination is going to have some slight impact on how we need to do that mid-course correction. At least I think it does. So let's just do what we got to do here. That's going to be, looks like going positive is bringing the minimum altitude down. And pretty much right there. Just get a nice tight pass though, because obviously none of this is going to hold, but we'll just get it all the way down. Like that. So now we'll come back to stage 2 on this side, and stage 1 over here, and set up the maneuver. Notice it says view maneuver, but if I press VW, it still says view maneuver. So sometimes you may see me go in a circle like that, and the reason I do it is, I've explained this in some other video. Sometimes when you go back and forth between stages, the view is not correct. Like if I go forward over here and I view setup, and I come back here and it says view setup, but I hit VW again, sometimes it won't actually change the stage. And anyway, that's just one of those little quirky things about Transx. So if you ever notice me seemingly going in a circle here between setup and maneuver, that's why, because sometimes the stages don't hold, or sometimes the stages keep the previous view, so when you go back, you have to reset your view. Maneuver mode on, and date. It's at 8546, so we'll go to at least 8600. And it's probably good there. That'll give me quite a bit of time to set this up. And we'll see if prograde helps. And let's start with bringing the PE ratio down before we worry about relative inclination. So let me start over with the prograde. Okay, that's bringing the PE ratio down. And now I'll do the change plane. Let's reset that. Let me go back to prograde. Let me see if okay. Let's see about outward. Okay, outward's bringing down the relative inclination, but raising the PE ratio. And then prograde is bringing down the PE ratio, but raising the relative inclination a little bit. So we'll go back and forth between these. Let me try something else, because since I'm adding in negative outward, that should mean that I'm basically trying to speed up my approach over to Uranus. So let me reset outward and come back to prograde. And let's bring down the relative inclination with prograde. And then try to adjust the plane change. Just experimenting here. I don't really know what's going to help the most. Okay, looks like we're slowly getting there. Okay. Total delta V cost of 600. I wonder if there's a way I can get a little bit cheaper on that. Turn the radio chatter off. Well, again, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and go with this solution, because this is going to be a very long video anyway, and if I obsess over the details here with the maneuver, it's going to end up being a 3-hour video. So let's just tweak this just to get the last little bit. Okay, got the PU ratio down to 1. And a relative inclination 0.03. That's about as low as that's going to get. Okay.
Translation, rotation.
Now let's get rotated. That's going the wrong way. Once I have the green X in one of the corners, like that. Down a little bit. Now I'm going to yaw. I'm going to put in 10x time acceleration to speed that up. Okay. And since it flipped around to the other side, it meant that I'm yawing in the wrong direction. I would have been better off if I'd yawed the other way, but I don't know how you can know that without going and looking at the external view, and I shouldn't say the external view, but looking at the HUD. it would help if the green X would have like a color indicator, so if you're facing the direction you need to be facing, then it's green. But if you're sort of backwards, then maybe it would turn red. And maybe if you're off to the side, then maybe it would be yellow or something like that. So if you saw that it was red, then you would know that you're backwards and would need to go. It might help you know which way to go. Anyway, let's fast forward 10x, 100x. Okay. And we're down to about 5 seconds from the burn. 3, 2, and burning. And looks like we're basically slowing ourselves down because we're burning facing Saturn. Getting close to the end of this burn. Backing off the main engines. Okay.
Translation.
And that was the first burn that I was talking about, the one that would probably be large. And it was indeed fairly large. And hopefully the remaining burns between here and Uranus are just, 10, 15 meters a second, stuff like that. .00. I'm going to remote off. And there we have it. Let's check our encounter date to see how much that changed. So instead of 113233, it's now 113423. That's quite a bit more time. So yeah, another 6 months that we just added to our journey. Okay. Let's get going. Out to 100,000, and we're just going to do a lot of time warp right now because we got a long way to go. And I'm just going to actually mute my mic for maybe a minute or two. So I'll be right back. I think what I'll do is warp time forward until it's time to resupply our oxygen, and at that time I'll resupply the oxygen and do another mid-course correction, because we are drifting, as expected. I might even stop a little early and do the first mid-course correction, because I think if I wait too long it may cost me more DV than it would if I do it earlier. But I don't want to stop and do a mid-course correction every time it drifts a little bit, because again, it's going to take a long time to get out there, and if I'm stopping every few minutes to make mid-course corrections, then we're never going to get there. So that's going to be the plan. You can see our Neptune encounter, still quite some time out in the future. Normally I would listen to a little bit of music or something while I'm doing this type of time warp, but since I'm recording video, I can't do that, or else I'll get all kinds of copyright violations with the YouTube upload. Watching my relative inclination, it's actually coming down a bit, but the PE ratio is going up. So we're getting farther away from our encounter with the surface, but we're getting closer in terms of the lineup. Something we can do, actually come out of time warp for just a moment.
Rotation, translation.
Just with a little bit of translation, I can actually see if I'm putting in a couple of down presses, that's bringing the relative inclination down. And if I put in a little bit of left yaw, that's bringing the PE ratio down. So even without taking the time to set up a maneuver, I can do a little bit of correcting this way. Since we're so far out, that much, correction goes a long way, just with a little bit of translation. And we'll leave it at that for now and go back to 100,000. That might even be the way to go, rather than taking the time to set those maneuvers up, because it's just a simple matter of, a couple bursts of translation one way or the other. I turned the radio chatter back on just to have something to listen to. And I'll tell you what, my throat's actually a little rough, so I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to go ahead and mute the mic out again for a little while. We've got a long way to go, so if you want to watch everything feel free, of course, but if you don't, just go ahead and skip ahead, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a time until we get out to Uranus. But I'm recording everything because some people actually like to watch what happens. So I'm going to mute out for a little bit. come back at a time warp for a moment and go ahead and top off our oxygen. We're at 2 years, 7 months. So let me go to cargo and hit use O2. I'm just curious how many it's going to use. So it used number 6 and 7. And we're topped out again. And as before, I'm just going to do a little bit of translation rather than set up a maneuver.
Rotate translation.
A little bit of forward translation is bringing the PE ratio down, and it's also bringing down the relative inclination. Okay, we just about got the relative inclination as low as it'll get. So let's see. And we'll say that's good enough. Without using a maneuver, it's not quite as easy to be as precise, but saves a little bit of time. And I was kind of just looking at, what do you call it, interplanetary MFD. I don't really use this MFD for much of anything, so I'm not real familiar with it, so I was just kind of looking at it to see what, basically just to see what I could see. I'm going to go back to this view for a moment, because you get cleaner looking displays. At least it's obvious that this is the orbit of Saturn. That's where we were. This is the orbit of Uranus. This is where we're going. And this is obviously where we are. That's our path. And this is where Uranus is at in its orbit. So that much is obvious. But as far as setting up a planet encounter, I don't really know how to do that. Yeah, I have no idea what I'm looking at. I'm completely unfamiliar with this MFD. I can't even tell if I'm targeting Uranus anymore. All I see is reference sun. I don't see where I'm targeting anything. I'll target equator. Okay, now I've got the target. Yeah, I have no idea. One of these days, I really do want to learn this MFD though, because I know that it has some aspects that are superior to Transax. So I need to just learn how to use it to go to Mars or something like that, and then, you know, obviously I could adapt from there. Okay, that was course. Okay, looks like there's only one menu. Just trying to be sure that, or trying to be careful I don't push the wrong button in interplanetary MFD and have it automatically fire an engine, because I know it does have that capability. It has auto burn, different auto burns programs, so if you push the wrong button, like in, you know, orbit, like circularization, it'll try to circularize around the sun or something, and that would be disastrous. So that's pages back and forth, like page 1, page 2. Reference would be the sun, which is fine, I guess, because we're technically orbiting the sun. Target is set to Uranus, so my question would be just how do I, like if I wanted to tell interplanetary MFD that I wanted to actually go to Uranus, what information does it provide me that would help me do that? So this blue line must be our orbital path. And that's where we are. Okay, PRJ, which stands for projection in orbit MFD, but seems to mean something else in this MFD. HTO and transfer MFD means hypothetical transfer orbit. I don't know if that's what it means here or not. Some other time I'll figure that out. Let's see. Previous. I don't know. Oh, wow. It's only 2164. We still got like 5 years to go. Am I at maximum time warp? Yeah. When I recorded the Grand Tour the first time, I skipped all the recording of all the of all the time warp. I would get to a planet like Jupiter. I would do, spend a little bit of time there showing the planet, showing the arrival, showing the departure, and then once I got out away from it and did the the mid-course correction, I would stop recording and then time warp out till I was about 100 days away from the next planet, and then I would pick up recording again and repeat that process. And I'm thinking maybe for these outer planets that might have been a better idea. Getting over to Jupiter wasn't too bad, and then going from Jupiter to Saturn wasn't too bad. But this Saturn to Neptune, or rather Saturn to Uranus leg is very, very long. And if I weren't recording, then I would just Alt-Tab out and do something, browse the web or something. So, since I'm actually recording, I don't have anything to do except look at my screen. So I think what I may do is when I get to Uranus, I think I might skip recording the time warp phase between Uranus and Neptune. It's just too much of nothing. But since I've already kind of committed to this Saturn to Uranus sling, I'll go ahead and finish recording this one. One, 1, 3, 4, 4, 5. So yeah, we're still looking at June 2169. A little over 4 years. Let's see, 4 years times, let me see, it's like 5 minutes per year, I think. So about 20 more minutes. And we've got 3 years, 8 months of oxygen, so we're going to have to top off our oxygen again before we even get to Uranus. Go forward and take a look at our Neptune encounter, and we can see now that we've drifted enough that we're not even registering. So I think we can probably resolve that without coming out of time warp. And we'll go with that. We just have our encounter running straight into Neptune. That should mean the least amount of fluctuation. And we'll come back over here. Notice it says view maneuver, but when I press VW, it still says view maneuver. Three years of oxygen, and 3.5 years of time warp to go. I think I'll just keep time warping until we're down to about a year. Because everything seems relatively stable. You know, we're holding a relative inclination that's not, 90 degrees or something crazy. And our PE ratio is just 2. It's not 36. So that's reasonably stable. 'And we can see here how things are coming along. That green line, I should say this part of the green line is our sling. I shouldn't actually point to that part, because this part is obviously, that's just the other side of their trajectory, but we didn't come from here, because that's the sun. So when I say, this is our trajectory, this is actually inaccurate. We came from like out here, and this part should probably maybe be dim green, or maybe a dashed line of green, sort of representing that that's just the other side of the trajectory, but that's not actually part of the trajectory. I mean, you didn't come from here. I think actually I noticed an interplanetary MFD. Yeah, I mean, it kind of, it shows more, where you're at and where you're going, not necessarily that long extra line of where you hypothetically would have been on that trajectory. Three years to go. I guess I could probably hit use locks or use O2. I don't imagine it's affected by time warp. Let's find out. Okay. It's good to know. You can use your O2 even while you're at maximum time warp. Looks like it's using 2 at a time. So we should have plenty to go all the way out to Neptune. And I think when I get out to Neptune, I'll plan on getting into orbit around Neptune and maybe landing on one of the moons. Two and a half years to go. Come out of time warp just for a moment.
Rotate translation.
Do a little bit of correcting here, mainly just to give myself something to do. A little bit of main engine to bring the PE ratio down. And now a little bit of translation to finish everything off here. And we'll go with that for now. And back to 100,000. Kind of looks like our Uranus sling's going to be... It's not quite a proper sling, I don't think. Maybe our date wasn't quite right. We are getting some bending here, but it's almost a straight line. You can see, I mean, it just comes out here, and we're just getting a little bit of influence and then going out. So that's not really what I would consider a proper sling. Whereas, you know, the Jupiter and Saturn slings we were in really tight. But our focus PED is 10 times, almost 10 times the radius. I do believe we're going to be plenty close enough to get a good look, because it's still a gas giant. but it's almost more like a Uranus just happens to be in the path that we were already on anyway, as opposed to, getting a proper gravity sling out of it. Like if this hadn't been here, we would still just be passing by this particular spot anyway, and we would still be getting over to Neptune. And about 2 years to go. And it looks like as we're getting here reasonably close to Uranus, our trajectory's holding pretty well. We're not getting nearly as much drift. P ratio is holding close to 1. Relative inclination looks like it's kind of going back and forth. I see 3941, 39 knots going down. So yeah, it's kind of dancing back and forth a little bit. If I ever use this date again, I'll have to see if leaving a day or two later, maybe even a week later, would have a closer sling here past Uranus. I may have left either slightly too early or slightly too late. I think if anything it would have been a little too early. Let me think about that. Are we rushing to get to Neptune, or are we trying to stall for time? I don't know, I can't figure it out. I'm not that bright. I think we're about 1 year away. Double check our date. 113447. 113447. June 2169. So yeah, about 1 more year. And after that long journey, have to make sure we don't overdo the time warp at the end, you can fall into that trap of becoming desensitized to the 100,000 time warp, and then when you get relatively close, you just, warp in really fast and then just fly right past it. I've done that before. I believe 100,000 time warp passes each day in slightly less than 1 second. So when you get down to maybe, 2-3 months out, you want to back off the time warp, because at that point you're just a minute or so away. And of course we want to keep an eye on our slingshot view here. We don't want to become complacent and let our relative inclination get really far out or anything like that, but it looks like it's still holding pretty well. But when we're 3 months or so out, I'll bring everything to a halt and do one final check. And we can kind of look here at our encounter Neptune in the meantime, and kind of do what we were doing. Make these adjustments to make sure that it's still on track. Because in theory, as you make the change to get your encounter at Neptune where you need it, it could have some small impact on how your relative inclination and PE ratio needs to be from your Uranus sling, or any planet you're going to, the next one in the sequence. If you need to make some big change here, then it might say, well, your relative inclination around Uranus needs to be slightly over here instead. But so far it doesn't look like making this correction is having any meaningful impact on our Uranus encounter. Still a few months to go. I'm just going to keep adjusting this, and I'll just have it impacting Neptune, because obviously it's not going to make, if we're not saying that that's our final goal is to crash into Neptune, you can see it changes radically just by a matter of seconds. So by having it dialed all the way into the crashing into Neptune, it will give us the least amount of fluctuation regardless which direction it goes. You see, if I go this way a little bit, you can see that's coming down. So if I err out that way, then it should be getting closer in. And let me just go out quite a bit. We'll see if that'll... Okay, we're January, February. You can see it's still drifting this way, so add in some more. March. Go out a little farther again. One, 1, 3, 4, 4, 7. One, 1, 3, 4, 4, 7. So we're still looking at June 2169. We're getting pretty close. You can see one of our stages just ended. Okay, we're down now to where we're just 60 days away or so. So let's bring up orbit, MFD, and let's copy that information over to the HUD. Let's look forward.
Rotation.
And let's rotate so we're facing Uranus. And that will be Uranus right there in front of us. You can see it. I'm going to hit Control S right now. I'm always a little nervous that after doing one of these long time warps that the orbiter's going to just up and decide to crash on me. Okay, now bring up Transx. Let's go forward out to the Neptune encounter. Everything looks good there. Come back to stage 1. And we can't actually do a maneuver, as I discovered or found out yesterday, or realized what happens when I turn maneuver mode on. Since this is stage 1 and this is stage 1, you'll notice as no matter how much I put in, it doesn't have any effect here, so I'm going to just reset that, turn maneuver mode off, and we'll just use a little bit of translation to bring that relative inclination down. Okay, and see what it can do about the PE ratio. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, bringing the relative inclination down is raising the PE ratio. That's not much of a surprise, though. That type of thing typically happens. So what I'm going to do is just get the relative inclination good and low. And we'll go ahead and warp time ahead and just kind of see what happens with the PE ratio. It's still pretty low, 1.02. And we'll go 100,000. And again, we want to make sure that we don't become numb to the time warp and fly right by. So we're at May. And let me check the date again. June 26th. So we've got a month to go. And that'll be about 30 seconds at maximum time warp. So June 3rd, June 4th, June 5th. And at June 16th, come out of time warp and see how our numbers are looking.
Rotate translation.
And bringing the PE ratio down with a little bit of lateral, and then I'm bringing the relative inclination down with a little bit of up-down translation. And it's good and low right there. Quickly go forward, check our Neptune encounter. Looks good. So I think we're okay to go forward with our sling. Actually, let me go ahead and leave this view up here. Okay. And that's the Uranus sling. Got a gravitational influence of 1, so we are close enough to get a, quite a bit of gravity assist out of it. Whereas if we were coming by and the gravity was like, 0.75 at its highest, then that would mean we missed it by quite a bit. But you can see we got a good look at it, even though we're not nearly as close as we were at Saturn and Jupiter. Once everything smooths out, there we are. Just waiting for the graphics to smooth out. Come inside and get the really cool view.
Rotation.
Oops. Graphics still look a little lumpy to me. Another good looking planet though. Okay, let's take a look at some stuff. And then we'll wrap it up for this part of the video. Oxygen, let's go ahead and fill up. Okay, we're back to 5 years. I'm going to Control S here before I get to periapsis. I think that'll make for a good save point. I wish I'd done that with the other encounters. And let's take a look at our Slingshot. It's still, P ratio is almost 1. Relative inclination is really low. Encounter at Neptune looks fine. So I think we're all set. Go ahead and warp time forward like I did before, so we can go ahead and go all the way past our encounter, past periapsis I mean. $11,000 seconds away.
Translation. Rotation.
Heavy contact north Castle. Having us up there.
We've got one of the moons. Ariel, Miranda, Oberon.
Translation. Rotation.
Okay, I think we'll leave it there. Go back to the captain's chair and see exactly where we're at. Yeah, we're past periapsis. So Control S to save the scenario right here, and this is where we will pick up in the next part of the video, where obviously we will go out to Neptune. And let's check our date real quick. So we're saying we're going to encounter Neptune here. (116,148, 2176). It's not as long of a trip as it was from Saturn over to here. Maybe I will record the whole thing, we'll see. I don't know, I just feel like it's not interesting enough, and I can't talk for 30 minutes about nothing. So let's just see what happens. That's going to be it for this part of the video. As a reminder to myself, whenever you have transx plans set up, make sure that you have transx up on at least one of the MFDs before you save the scenario. So I'm going to hit Control S again, because I'm pretty sure I had transx up on at least one side before, but since I'm not 100% certain, I'm going to do it again so I can see now that I have transx up. Because again, if you don't have transx up on at least one side, then when you come back to your saved scenario, all your transx information will be gone. If you like this part of the video, if you like this journey from Saturn over to Uranus, please leave some kind of comment down below, and I will see you in the next video.